Good morning. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to attempt to break down the IRS taxing liabilities in a hopefully easily digestible way. I want to preface this with a couple things. One, it has taken many hours to go through this because the way the code is written, it is extremely difficult to dig out the information that you're looking for, which to me is evidence of criminal activity. If this was just a simple matter of we owe tax on all of the money that we make, that ought to be a pretty straightforward and simple thing to write down on a piece of paper. It shouldn't require millions of words and thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages. But I'm not going to get into all that. We're just going to kind of try to stay focused on exactly what the tax code says. I am going to add my opinion of some of this stuff, but I'm going to stick to purely code. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go only through the code, and we're going to kind of look things up, and when something references another section, we'll jump into it and take a look at it. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we're looking at here, this is the diagram that this is all of the stuff that is related to income tax that's relevant to what we're actually going to be discussing. So we're going to kind of focus through here, and then if anybody points out anything that they'd like for me to dig into deeper, I can definitely do that. So the first thing that we start off with, and all of these things are actually coming from Title 26 with one exception, and I'll point that out when I get there. But the first thing that we look at here is 7701. So we're Title 26, 7701A14. This is just a definition. Now, I want to point out Section 7701 is the primary definitions for the entire Title 26. If you go into Title 26 and go down to the bottom, look at all your different numbers and stuff, you'll get to definitions, and they're down toward the end. And that's where most of these definitions are found. There are exceptions. There's some that come from other places, and I'll point those out as we go, but most of these are coming from the same section. The reason I bring this up is that it might be easy to say, oh, well, you're digging for definitions in other sections of the code, and therefore they're irrelevant. I just want to point out that these are coming from the primary definition section of the Title 26. So the term taxpayer means any person subject to any internal revenue tax. Sounds pretty simple, except we then, and note this is A14, but A1 in that same section defines a person. The term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, a trust, a state, partnership, association, company, or a corporation. Okay. So now we got to look up individual. Now, individual is a secret word that only the IRS can understand. And so they don't actually define it inside of Title 26. Now, we could assume that an individual is actually a person, is actually me, the physical me. We could assume that, but I don't think it would be very safe to assume anything with respect to these people because they've provided all these definitions for everything. And so in section, this is the one exception, in section 5 of the USC, same code base, it's just in a different section. It says the term individual means a citizen of the United States or an alien lawfully admitted for permanent residence. So we'll just leave that out there as a questionable definition because we didn't get it specifically from Title 26, but it is a definition nonetheless. And so Title or Section 1.1, now this is the CFR. Now, the CFR is Code of Federal Regulations, and the USC is actually the law. The CFR is a more wordy definition. It's the thing that the agencies actually go create. So the law gets passed and says that you can tax all income. which it doesn't. But then the CFR, the agency, the IRS, which isn't actually an agency, but I digress, it will take the law and then it will apply what it believes the law says, and it'll give you a bunch of code regulations. And so CFR is just the more wordy version of the law itself. So up here, you'll see these are USC, these are the actual laws, and then the CFR is the, the stuff the IRS wrote. Supposedly they didn't actually write this, but whatever. So it says every person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction is a citizen. So this sounds like anybody born in the country and subject to its jurisdiction. But here's the problem, and we've talked about this in earlier videos. There is no jurisdiction that covers the whole country. So making a blanket statement like that doesn't make any sense at all with respect to our country unless there's some higher game that we need to be aware of. So this subject to its jurisdiction is something that should always throw up red flags when you see it, because it is only talking about a certain thing, and it may be a state, it may be a state citizen. 9 times out of 10, though, actually 100% of the time that I've ever seen, is actually talking about the District of Columbia. But we'll get into that. So again, every person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction is a citizen. United States. The term United States, when used in a geographical sense, includes only the states and the District of Columbia. Now, it's interesting that they put the word states here because it, again, makes you think that they're talking about the entire country. But in the same section, we're still in 7701. This is A10. In fact, this definition appears right after the United States. It says the term state shall be construed to include the District of Columbia where such construction is necessary to carry out the provision of this title. Now, if we were to go back to the United States definition and read it, it actually says the term United States, when used in a geographical sense, includes only the District of Columbia and the District of Columbia, because state is the District of Columbia. So now I want to, this is something that people like to bring up, and that's the word includes. And they say, oh, but it says it includes, so it must include other things. And so I would like for you to do a thought experiment and try to come up with one example where you would use the word includes that you're not actually being exclusionary by using it. And I'll give you an example. If I were to say for the topic of this conversation that the word fruit includes bananas and apples, would you automatically add watermelons into the definition for fruit? Because I have now limited the definition for fruit to being bananas and apples. And so you're not necessarily going to just go and add a whole bunch of other stuff to it, because I've given you a definition. I've provided something specific that I want to make sure you understand. So do the experiment. See if you can come up with an example where you would use the word include, where you're actually adding another thing to this class of things that you're talking about. So let's continue. State citizens. All right, so we know what a state is a District of Columbia. So now let's look at a state citizen. It says citizens and residents outside the United States. Now, you could assume, and it can mean that you're not in the United States of America. You've actually left and gone to France. So that could be another interpretation of this. But it says if any citizen. So the first thing is that you have to be a citizen, and we've already covered that a citizen is a citizen of the District of Columbia, because that's what it says. And so the classification here is that you have to be a citizen or resident of the United States and does not reside in. Now, this is kind of a typical government definition because it makes no sense whatsoever. It says citizens and residents outside the United States. If any citizen or resident of the United States does not reside in the United States, well, how could you be a resident of the United States if you don't reside there? And does not have his principal place of business in any United States judicial district, such citizen or resident shall be treated for the purposes of this section as residing in the District of Columbia. Now, here is the interesting thing to note about this. What this is actually saying is that if you're a citizen of the United States, no matter where you live, they are going to classify you as if you live in the District of Columbia. Now, again, I want you to keep in mind that you think the United States is representing the entire country, but they clearly just said that it does not, because it's citizens and residents outside the United States. If any citizen or resident of the United States does not reside in and does not have his principal place of business in any United States judicial district, then we're going to consider them to be residing in the District of Columbia. Well, why didn't it say residing in the United States? It specifically says the District of Columbia. So they have now conflated these two terms together to the point that United States and District of Columbia are the same thing, which we already know because of the definition they provided. So now we're going to go down here. Let me fix this thing here. So now we're down here looking at the amount subject to withhold. So it says, in general purposes of the regulations under this chapter, the Internal Revenue Code, the term amount subject to withholding means amounts from sources within the United States. So all the rest of this is irrelevant. It's amounts from sources within the United States. The United States is the District of Columbia with respect to this entire code. You can believe what you want to believe, and that's perfectly okay. But with respect to the code, the Title 26, the United States is the District of Columbia. And so when this says from sources within the United States, you have to pay taxes on any money that comes from within the District of Columbia. So, for example, if I do work for the federal government and they pay me, I have to pay taxes on that money. The source was from within the United States, and therefore I have to pay taxes on it. So I'm not sitting here saying that you never have to pay taxes on any income you make. It just depends on where that money comes from. All right, so then I want to move over here to tax return forms and instructions. And the main thing I want to point out here is that, and this is 26 CFR 601.602, voluntary compliance. It says the tax system is based on voluntary compliance. So I'm only pointing that out that there is no mandatory law that says that you have to file an income tax. It is based on whether or not you made income, where the source of that income came from, and whether or not you're liable to file that tax form. And so it is a voluntary system. It's not something that you absolutely have to go file an income tax every year. So the next thing we get to is income tax on individuals, and it says this code imposes an income tax on the income of every individual who is a citizen or resident of the United States, and to the extent provided on non-resident aliens, and this is 871 and 877B. Now, I've covered this in other videos. Those sections specifically say that non-resident aliens, again, I'm not resident in the District of Columbia, and I am an alien to the District of Columbia. I'm not a citizen. They have to pay taxes on any money that comes from within the United States, and that's what those two sections say. I did not include them in this because they're kind of irrelevant, but if you make money from the federal government, then you do have to pay taxes. All right, so now we're going to come up here to the term non-resident alien. Now, it's interesting that they don't tell you what a non-resident alien is. They actually tell you what it is not. And so the definition of a non-resident alien individual means an individual whose residence is not within the United States and who is not a citizen of the United States. I do not live in the District of Columbia, and I'm not a citizen of the District of Columbia. Therefore, I am, by their definition, a non-resident alien. Now, this is income tax on individuals. So this is what they are talking about with who has to actually pay the tax. The tax imposed by Section 1D, as amended by the Tax Reform Act of 1969, shall apply to the income effectively connected with the conduct of a trade or business in the United States by a married alien individual who is a non-resident. Okay, now, this section is interesting because If you file your taxes jointly with your wife, that joint tax return in the code section related to that joint tax return has you volunteering, even though you're a non-resident alien, it has you volunteering to be treated as a resident alien, which means you have to pay income tax. So if you're filing a joint tax return, that's where they're getting you. And by the way, if you're filing a joint tax return, you do have to pay income tax, because it specifically says when you filled out that joint tax return that's what you were agreeing to do. Now, it's hidden. It's not actually on the form itself. You have to go actually look up the code sections related to the form, but it is there. Now, if you did file a joint tax return and you want to get out of that, then you need to file an affidavit with the tax commissioner, notifying him of your desire to get out of that taxing declaration. And it's the code section tells you what you need to do, but it does not give you a form or anything to fill out. So the only thing that I've determined at this point is to give an affidavit to them stating that I want to remove this declaration. And I can do a video if anybody's interested on exactly what I did there. But that's something that you do need to pay attention to, because if you're filing jointly, you do have to pay income tax. All right, so the next thing we have up here is the classification and manner, and it says non-resident alien individuals, non-resident, don't live in the District of Columbia, alien, not a citizen, individuals, so this is where we get a little convoluted, because individual here is being used as referencing a non-resident alien, but individual over in the definitions in section 5 said that it was a citizen of the United States. So that's why the term individual may or may not be a citizen of the United States with respect to the code, but it's kind of irrelevant for our purposes. So non-resident alien individuals who at no time during the taxable year are engaged in a trade or business in the United States. So, and just to kind of show you this section, this is classification and manner of taxing alien individuals. So these are non-resident they are non-citizens, but they are classified as aliens, and so they're trying to include them into a United States taxing situation. Now, that trade or business is something that's used all over the place, and it's something that we need to look up. Now, in section 7701, the same section we've been getting all these other definitions, they have a definition for trade or business. It says the term trade or business includes the performance of the functions of a public office. So we all assume trade or business is a trade or business, what we think it means, but they've actually supplied a specific definition for a trade or business that says it's functions of a public office. So that is very interesting. I'm not a public servant, therefore I don't have a public office. Now, wages. Wages, for the purpose of this chapter, the term wages means all remuneration for employment. Now, here's the key word, and that's where we're going to go next, and including cash and all. So we don't really care about the rest of this. We're just saying means all remuneration for employment. So now we need to go look up what employment is. And yes, people, this is retarded. It is, but the mere fact that they defined all of these things that have common meanings should tell you that there's something fishy going on with this entire process. Otherwise, why in the world do you have all these definitions? And the definitions don't match what you think they are. So employment, for the purposes of this chapter, the term employment means any service of whatever nature performed by an employee for the person employing him, irrespective of the citizenship or residence of either within the United States or in connection with an American vehicle, American plane, boat, whatever. Now, this is interesting because it says that it has, even though they're defining this as employment as being related to being an employee, they do say within the United States. So again, it's within the District of Columbia. So even if you are doing something outside of the District of Columbia and it fits some of this definition, you still aren't within the United States, so it's still irrelevant. And again, it has to be, because the federal government only exists inside of that 10 square mile District of Columbia area, and they have no jurisdiction outside of that area. So they can't imply a tax or apply a tax to us who don't live inside their jurisdictional area. So all of these things seem cryptic, and they are, but they're written cryptic to try to trick you into believing something that actually isn't true at all. So let's look at what an employee is. So we know employment is somebody that works as an employee. So let's look at an employee. The term employee includes every individual performing services if the relationship between him and the person for whom he performs such services is in the legal relationship of employer and employee. Okay. And then it goes on to say the term includes officers and employees, whether elected or appointed. So again, it starts to imply that we're talking about political offices here, because everything that it starts to define is all related to a political organization. So let's go on down here. So here's employer. Again, it's defined in their code. The term employer embraces not only individuals and organizations engaged in a trade or business, but organizations exempt from include such as religious and charitable, Now, so we have an employee, which is in a trade or business, an employee works for an employer is operating in a trade or business, and trade or business is a political office. I did not write these definitions. I don't have anything to do with them. All I'm doing is looking them up and reading them. So, a withholding agent. So now, what we have concluded now is that as an employee, you're not supposed to be paying taxes. You can pay them if you want to, but it's a voluntary compliance. You're volunteering to pay that tax. However, as a company that is collecting this tax, I have a liability to make sure that I take that money and send it to the federal government. So I, as a withholding agent, am admitting that I am operating a trader business, and therefore I am taking the money out of my employees' paychecks by the code and sending it off to the federal government. So the term withholding agent means any person required to deduct and withhold any tax under provisions of this section or of section 1441, 1442, 1443, and 1461. So that is what they classify as a withholding agent. Now, this is where it starts to get kind of interesting. So 1441, here is 1441, except as otherwise provided in subsection C, all persons in whatever capacity acting, including lessee or mortgagors of real or personal property, fiduciaries, employers, and all officers and employees of the United States, having the control, receipt, custody, disposal, or payment of such items. So it's basically saying, and it goes on here, to the extent that any such items constitute gross income from sources within the United States. So again, they are specifically saying that even if I fit all of these other things, I'm only required to withhold money that is coming from within the United States. When I pay my employees, I do not pay them from money coming from within the United States. It did not come from the District of Columbia. It's coming from other areas, and therefore I am not obligated to do this even if I fit some of the other things, because again, the sources are not from within the United States, not from within the District of Columbia. All right, so then we have withholding tax on non-resident aliens. So this is 1441. Okay, so this is money coming from within. So now we're on to 1442. So here is that's this is the section B, and their code refers to section B in this section as well. So let's take a look at it real quick. Income items, the income or the items of income referred to in subsection A, which is what we just read, are interest other than original issue discount as defined, dividends, and we're just going to skip over all of this crap. And it says amounts subject to tax under section 871. 871 is is the section on whether it came from within the United States, and gains subject to tax under 871A 1D. The items of income referred to in subsection A from which tax shall be deducted and withheld at a rate of 14%. Are amounts which are received by a non-resident alien individual who is temporarily present in the United States as a okay, so this section, this 1441, is related to income that's paid to a non-resident alien that is temporarily in the United States. He's in the District of Columbia receiving payments in the District of Columbia. So that's what 1441 is related to. 1442 is related to foreign corporations. So this would be a situation where you have a foreign corporation that's making money from within the United States, then they have to pay the tax. So this says in the case of foreign corporations subject to taxation under this title. So again, you have to be subject to the tax, which the only subject to the tax is whether or not the money came from within the District of Columbia. And so that's your 1442. Here is 1443, and this is related to tax-exempt organizations. In the case of income of a foreign organization subject to the tax imposed by Section 511, this chapter shall apply in computing its unrelated business taxable income, but only to the extent and subject to such conditions as provided under regulations prescribed by the Secretary. So again, this is tax-exempt organizations. It also subject to the tax imposed. And so this is not really related to us anyway, but it's another example of them, the source having to come from within the United States. Now, withholding tax of a non-resident alien, this is 1441C. So 1441, let me look here. Yeah, 1441 was the first section that it actually referenced. And so it has a section C, which is a exemption thing, and it says no deduction or withholding under subsection A shall be required in the case of any item of income other than compensation for services which is effectively connected with the conduct of a trade or business within the United States and which is included in the gross income. So what this section is actually excluding is that if I'm a non-resident alien and I made money from within the United States and I filed the appropriate form according to 871 for that income, then I'm not obligated to worry about this section because I've already put it on another form. But again, it's money coming from within the United States. It's not just any money that I make. So here is 871. All right, so they're talking right here, 871B. So here's 871B. In determining taxable income for purposes of this paragraph, gross income includes only gross income which is effectively connected with the conduct of a trade or business within the United States, the District of Columbia. So I'm only, as a non-resident alien, I am only obligated to pay taxes on money I make that comes from the District of Columbia or a federal organization, a federal enclave. So now we have a foreign person, an individual who is not a citizen or a resident of the United States, but not including any individual for whom an election under Section 603G. This is the trick. This is the joint tax return. 6013 is your joint tax return. Go look it up and read it. It also has the section in there on how to unelect. You need to read it and actually, do what it says. But again, this is a joint tax return. Now let's look at the joint tax return. In section 6013G, it says election to treat non-resident alien individual as a resident of the United States. So they had you file a joint tax return under the guise that you were going to save money on your taxes. In reality, that joint tax return has this tied to it that is not on the form. You will not find it, but you can find it if you go look it up, 26 USC 6013. And it, in that code related to the form, it makes you liable. It has you declaring yourself as a citizen of the District of Columbia. Classification and manner of non-resident alien individual who at no time during the taxable year are engaged in a trade or business in the United States. Okay, and this is this section, and it is classification and manner of taxation on alien individuals. You'll also, and I'm going to get to this over there, but since I'm here, classes of non-resident aliens in general for the purposes of income tax. Non-resident alien individuals are divided into three classes. And then the one class, it says non-resident alien individuals who at no time during the taxable year are engaged in a trade or business in the United States. I mean, I don't know how much clearer you can get, but all right. So that was you electing by filing a joint tax return. And so now we are over here to, now that is pretty much the end of this. Let me make sure I got through all this. Yeah. So that is the end of the tax debate. I mean, that is you. If you file the joint tax return, you need to get out of that. Absolutely. But you as an individual are absolutely a non-resident alien. You cannot be a District of Columbia citizen unless you naturalize there. So unless you have purposely gone and joined the District of Columbia, you can't be a United States citizen. Therefore, the 14th Amendment does not apply to you at all. You are a state citizen or a state national. And when I use state national, that's their definitions in their code. That's what they call us. But you're a state citizen by the Constitution, and you have the First, Second, Third, Fourth, and Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, Eighth Amendment rights. It is interesting to note that a 14th Amendment citizen doesn't have a freedom of speech or freedom to carry firearms. So that's something that you should also keep in mind, because a 14th Amendment citizen, the 14th Amendment doesn't give you the ability to have freedom of speech or be able to carry firearms. So I'm going to leave this video with one final thought. Every one of us is scared of the IRS for one big, simple reason, and that is the fact that they can levy your paycheck, they can levy your property, they can take your house. That's what they want you to believe. There's only one section that I have found in the entirety of the tax code that is related to levying anyone's property, because the government does not have the ability, without due process and criminal activity on your part, to take your property. In fact, I don't even know that they have the ability to take your property even if you committed a crime. But they have one section. It is section 6331 that gives them the levy and distraint ability, authority of secretary. Now, I want to preface this with a couple things. When they send this information to a bank or to your employer, they send them paragraph B. And paragraph B actually states that they have the ability to levy these things. It absolutely says that. But paragraph A clearly says who they can do that to. So in conclusion, if any person liable to pay, you have to be liable to pay any tax, neglects or refuses to pay the same within 10 days after notice and demand, it shall be lawful for the secretary to collect such taxes and such further sum as shall be sufficient to cover the expenses of the levy. By levy upon all property and rights to property, except such property as is exempt under section 6334 belonging to such persons, or which there is a lien provided in this chapter for the payment of such tax. Levy may be made upon the accrued salary or wages of any officer, employee, or elected official of the United States, the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of the United States and the District of Columbia. So they do not have the ability to levy a state citizen's property. We do this because the courts are all in on this scam, and we never fought it because we didn't know better. So learn the code, learn what the law is. All of this stuff is right in front of you to look at every single day. It is a pain in the ass to go through it just to lay out this, and I actually have all of these codes all logged, and I'll show you what, just as an example here. So this is, again, my Obsidian database. I have all of these codes, and they're all logged in here. They're all, referencing the different sections and what the code says. It still took me probably 3 hours to lay out all of these slides, because you have to, one code section jumps to another code section, and then it comes back to another code section. Just as an example, the term trade or business, in a lot of the sections, it will tell you that trade or business is defined as in section 633, or let me find it here. It's it will be a CFR 601 or something. Yeah, 162 right here. So section 162, it'll say that it is defined as in section 162. Well, 162 doesn't define trade or business. It has no definition in there whatsoever. So they do all of this stuff to confuse us to where you can't follow what the heck they're talking about. They forced me to read for hours all of the code sections in section 162, trying to find the definition for trade or business, or even the implication of what a trade or business was, and nowhere in there was it defined. The only place that it actually had it defined was actually related to legislators. That was the only place in that whole section that it was somewhat defined, but it wasn't defined as clearly as it was over in section 7701, which is their primary definitions for the entirety of code section 26 or title 26. So this is a mess. We have allowed them to take advantage of us like this because we just don't have time to read all this stuff. So take advantage of me reading it, and there's plenty of other people reading it. I'm not doing this alone. There's hundreds of thousands and millions of people that know this, but wake up and realize that this whole thing is a game, and we're being taken advantage of by legalese and definitions that don't mean what you think they actually mean.